All right, so how do we write a class? Let's say we wanted to build out that comment class that we were talking about in the last video. How would we do that? Well, we'd start with the class keyword, and then we create a name for a class. So generally the convention is that you uppercase your class names. So we'll call this one comment, and then you put curly braces like this. So this is pretty much enough to have a class. I don't think we even need to put anything in it. So let's log out, let's see what we get. So if we do console, let's actually do const comment equals new comment, and you have to call it like a function, and then we'll console log out our new class, and let's take a look at what that looks like. Here. All right, so you can see here right away, it treats it similarly to like an object where it's collapsible. So if I open this here for a second, we can see we've got nothing inside of our comment at the moment. So just this proto thing, which we don't really need to care about. However, it's an empty class. So how can we add things to this class? Well, it's very similar to um, an object. So we can just define a function inside of our class. And this function is going to be available in every comment that we instantiate, every one that we create. So let's define a function. So let's define, what's a good method here? So like the comment. So like comment. And right now, we're just going to console.log something in here. So console.log liked the comment. And let's see now. So we've got our comment here. How can we use this? Well, if it's just like an object, how do you access methods on objects normally? Well, you can access it with a dot. So we can do comment dot like comment. We can call that. And this is a function that's going to console.log the like comment. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So you can see straight away, ooh, what's undefined here? Because this returns nothing. So we don't have to console log this anymore. We can just comment.like comment. Say that again. And we can see here we've got liked the comment. So simple as that in terms of defining methods inside of our class. I'm going to delete this console.log for now. Now, what if we want to pass in arguments to our comment? So you can imagine this comment is obviously going to have the details we spoke before, so a timestamp, a username, and then the actual comment itself. How can we keep track of that sort of thing? So you can see here it looks like a function, which means we can of course pass in arguments as if it were a function. So, but you can notice here I don't have curly brackets up top. So how do I actually access the things that I pass in? Well, with a class, we've got a special function with a special keyword that's called a constructor. So when we instantiate a class here, what we're doing is constructing it in essence. So let's take a look at the documentation around constructors before we jump into this too much. So constructor. So one way to define a class is using class declaration, which is what we're doing here. And you can see they've got this constructor function. So let's see if there's an actual explanation for the constructor. Yes. So the constructor method is a special method for creating and initializing an object created with a class. There can only be one special method named constructor in a class, and an error will be thrown if you try to define more. So the constructor is where we can accept the arguments that get passed in. So let's do this for now. So we're going to take our constructor, and well, what do we need for a comment? We need a comment, we need a username, and we need a timestamp for when it was posted. And what happens if we just console.log these out when it's created? So we're going to console.log constructing class, and then we're going to log out all of the variables that we pass in. So I'm gonna comment out this. We're not gonna like the comment. We're just gonna instantiate a new one to demonstrate when the constructor is called. So the constructor is always called when we instantiate the class. So we'll go ahead and save this here, and let's go ahead and look at the console. So now we can see first we're constructing the class, and then down below we've got all the variables, which right now are all undefined, and that's because we actually haven't passed anything in yet. And I'm logging these out in an object, but I'm not going to do that for simplicity's sake. So how can I actually add a comment in? So let's add some text here. This was a great YouTube video. Grading off. It's my username, and then timestamp. Let's just do a new date. Go ahead and save that. Perfect. So now if we go ahead and look there, we've got access to our all of our arguments that we passed in here. Now, typically in a function, how would you access an argument that you pass in? Well, you'd simply access the argument, right? So let's say we had a function called create comment, and we pass in all the same parameters, like this. In a normal function, we can access these here, but they're not really variables, right? They're more like, it's more data that you pass in, and you wouldn't really modify this data inside a function. You would just accept the data, and then, if we're creating a comment here, what would we do? Well, maybe we'd return an object with a comment, username, name, and then the timestamp. So all this function job is to create this object, which we're defining as a comment. And that's more or less all this class does. However, what if we needed functionality to, how do we add that liking comment functionality? How do we enable ourselves to modify the data in a way that restricts and encapsulates which data we're modifying and gives us a way to easily track that? Well, that's where the beauty of encapsulating things in the class comes in, right? So in a constructor, this is where we can actually define variables to access this information that we're passed in when we instantiate the class. So it's a really weird syntax, kind of, and it's done using a new keyword called this. So what I'll do in the constructor is I'll set this.comment equal to comment. And then I'll do it again, this dot username equal to username. And then finally, this dot timestamp is equal to timestamp. What are we doing here? Well, in an object, we don't define variables like we do normally. Like in our function down here, I can do const hello or const get age of comment, and then do some calculation here. But in a class, we can't define a constant inside. So const comment equals, you can see the syntax highlighting. Const modifier can only be used in TypeScript files. Okay, that's not very helpful. That's not relevant to what we're doing. But you can see here, if I tried to define a comment and set it equal to the comment up above, it doesn't really work, right? We can't. You have to think of this like an object, and you wouldn't define a constant on an object. You would simply define a property on an object. This syntax here is how we define the properties on an object. And these must be defined in the constructor. And this is the equivalent of saying that there is a variable inside this class called comment. And inside the constructor, we're setting the value of that based on the value passed in from comment. And you don't need to call this comment. It doesn't need to be the same as a parameter. You could call this anything. You could call this user comment. You can think of the value that we're defining here is how we create and declare variables inside a class. So if this is how we're creating and declaring variables, you can imagine that this is also how we access a variable. So generally when we're dealing with classes, if you want to access the value inside the class, we would define a function to do that. So what can we do? We can define a method inside the class to get the comment. So let's do get comment, and we will simply return this dot comment. And let's take a look if what I'm saying is true. So now that we've got our comment here, I'm going to delete this for a second. We can console.log. We'll get comment dot get comment, and we'll call that. And let's see what it returns. So I would expect it to return the comment that we pass in here, and it does. Now let's talk a little bit more about the this keyword, because this is kind of a weird thing. But I'm going to stop this video for now, and I'm going to continue the explanation around this in the next video.